each topic and determine its general and specific purposes, to organise the speech in a manner that best achieves those purposes, and to ensure the beginning, middle and end reinforce those purposes, to project sincerity and conviction, try to control any nervousness. And that's 5 to 7 minutes, please, Jim.
So if we can welcome Edema, please. Do you work for the Guatemalan Tourist Board? That's a question that a colleague of mine asked me about 2 years ago when she was looking for a holiday that she could take next, somewhere a little bit different, and I launched, possibly given that question, a slightly over-enthusiastic campaign to get her to consider the merits of Guatemala. As we've just heard, the point of the C3 speech is indeed to get to the point, and the point of my speech is to tell you a little bit about a place that most of you probably don't know too much about, and possibly even few of you have been to, but I believe is a wonderful country and makes for a fantastic destination. What I'm going to do today is tell you a little bit about Guatemala, where it is in its history. I'm going to talk to you about how I discovered it and why I love it. And I'm also going to talk to you a little bit about what I think it could have to offer yourselves. So to begin, Guatemala itself is about halfway down the Central American peninsula. It's bordered by Mexico, Belize, Honduras and El Salvador. There's about 16 million people that live in a space that's roughly about half the size of the UK. And Guatemala is famous for many things, but particularly probably its jungles and its ecosystems. And indeed the word Guatemala means place of many trees in one of the ancient Mayan-linked languages. In terms of how long people have been there, there's records, or not so much records as evidence going back to about 12,000, 18,000 BC, but probably the most famous, I guess, cultural developments in Guatemala and most of Latin America was what we know as the Mayan or the Aztec, and that took place around the mid-hundreds AD and lasted for just under a millennia really, to around 1500. And actually one of the charms of Guatemala is that you can still see evidence of that all across the country, not least in the fantastic jungle city of Ticao, which indeed is actually still covered in part by jungle because they haven't finished excavating it yet. After this period, the Spanish turned up. Colonialism came with many ills, as indeed it generally does, but one of the few things that it did offer was, again, a legacy of fantastic sites and architecture. And you can see all across Guatemala evidence of that in the beautiful colonial cities and towns, churches and everything you would expect. And indeed, probably the best example of that is a town called Antigua, Guatemala, which is about half an hour outside Guatemala City. In about 1820, Guatemala got its independence, and ever since then has established itself as a country in its own right. Probably best known in the living memory of people in this room for a fairly unpleasant civil war that went on for about 20 years, set against the Cold War backdrop, the struggle between leftist Marxism that was sweeping a lot of Latin America and a more nationalistic approach. Unfortunately, that came to the end in 1996, and since then, although it has some social issues, Guatemala has established itself as a stable democracy. So if that's Guatemala, and a little bit of a whistle stop, how did I come across it and why do I love it? As I mentioned in my C1, I was lucky enough in my 20s to travel around various different parts of the world. And one of those trips took myself and my now wife to Central America. We flew into Mexico City and we worked our way all the way down to Panama City at the bottom. And that took us to Guatemala, which was about halfway. And when I was on the border, I have to confess, I didn't know much about the place. I'd read a little bit, I'd seen a few pictures, but I wasn't probably prepared for what the country had to offer. I think initially my wife and I, we planned to stay for a week. We stayed for over a month, and we could have so easily stayed for so much more. I think what really came across was just the fantastic diversity of sights and sounds and experiences that were on offer on what really is quite a small geographical area. Guatemala has a wonderful Caribbean coast, it has a Pacific coast, it has beautiful mountains, it has fantastic volcanoes, one of which only erupted about last month. It has jungles, it has architecture, it has a fantastic set of people, it has big cities. It kind of has everything that you might like to see, all in a fairly small amount of space. So it's quite easy to access and travel. In fact, my wife and I, we loved it so much that when we were looking for someone to get married about 5 or 6 years ago, and we wanted to choose somewhere that wasn't Canada or wasn't England and was, in theory, equidistant between the two, or at least equally hard to get to from the two, we settled on Guatemala. And 6 years ago in November, we got married in Antigua, Guatemala, which I would definitely encourage you all to have a look at. So, why would it appeal to you? Well, hopefully you've picked up some of that from what I've said already, and I would just reiterate the fact that if any of those things I talked about sounds like something you're interested in, then Guatemala has it all. You know, you can spend one day in the jungle, you can take a bus ride, you can be on the Pacific coast, you can take another bus ride, you can be one of the best examples of colonial towns in the world, and much more besides. I think also in terms of the cost of travelling Guatemala, it is actually the biggest economy in Central America, but it is also, I guess it has many social issues, and part of that is linked to the fact that the wealth is not very evenly distributed. Fortunately, about half of the people live beneath the poverty line. This does also, however, make it a very economical place to travel for people from Europe and other countries that perhaps have a little bit more money. And while you are travelling there on a fairly reasonable budget, you can contribute directly to the local livelihoods and the local economies that you come into contact with. I think the other thing that I would really say to you is very much about the feel of the place. It's got that real Latin American kind of, I guess, sight, sounds, touch, smell, and it's a place where about 40% of the population is still, I guess, in terms of origin, Mayan, and a lot of those live very modern lives in the big cities, but a lot, particularly in the countryside, still live in ways that really haven't changed that much in the last few hundreds and sometimes thousands of years in terms of some of the practices that are carried on. So, in summary, if any of that sounds like it might be of interest to you, I would encourage you to spend a few minutes tonight, tomorrow, Googling just some of those things that I've mentioned. Google Guatemala. Google Lake Atitlan, which is one of the world's most spectacular lakes. Google Antigua, and Google La Finca Ixabel. And if you like what you see, and I think you will like what you see, then I think potentially you could find yourself in the near future boarding a plane from London, destination Guatemala City. Ladies and gentlemen, that concludes today's presentation from the unofficial Guatemalan tourist board.